I don't know how many of you are what we call hyperverbal in your head. That is, you talk to yourself all the time. It's constant inner dialogue that goes on, conversations with yourself. Nobody else has that problem. I find sometimes during meditation, if somebody's talking to me, I have the tendency to spend more time on their words than I do actually meditating. So starting off with a theme and giving us something to listen to that's a little cyclical, it's somewhat interesting, but not so interesting that you're going to get lost in music. And you'll have to come back around to your own meditation. So hopefully that was enjoyable for you. It comes from a book and an album that's called The Spiritual Tourist, which, as I talk today, feels like what I've been to a certain extent. So The Spiritual Tourist, basically, the book talks about this man who acts mostly like a traveling salesman, and he walks around to different religions, just kind of investigating what they're all about. And the book's not nearly as interesting as the album. So there's a CD that gets produced, and it's got everything from that to like Baptist Georgia church, and then singing like kind of gospel. It's very cool. So if you want to see the title and the author and everything else, I can get that to you afterwards. But now I will attempt, and I think I will be successful. Pretty sure that I will, to hook up my device here. They can be a little temperamental, these machines. So if you'll bear with the technical aspect. Ordinarily, I don't bring these things, but I find that being able to show you these pictures is going to be pretty neat. My resolution's a little off, so some of the stuff may be cut off a little bit, but this is a quote from Carl Sagan. I love that one too. So as a child, I was not at all. Actually, may I borrow this? Here. So as a child, I did have I'll be a professional baseball player, in like 4.5. So not that it was terribly uncommon, but very shortly after deciding that I was going to be a professional baseball player, I decided that Carl Sagan was my new hero, and this was my first book. I can't tell you that at like 5.5 I read this entire thing, but I could tell you what planetary telemetry was. So I was really fascinated by a lot of the pictures that he has in this book, as you can imagine. And so at any rate, this is one of my first books as a kid. And Carl Sagan was one of my first heroes, and my children have graciously decided to attend and be here with me now, and this was one of their first books as well. And a little bit about that, as a boy, basically, that was my church. So when we went to church, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. Why are we going in this really small, tiny place, hanging out here and listening to words when I could be staring at that? And so, it was really a process of. I grew up in Southern Baptist Church, so for many years we went to every Sunday to church. My children were begrudgingly saying, "Why do we have this I'm like, do you realize I went to church every Sunday for years? Every morning we had to get up and go to church. And naturally, sitting in the front row is very uncomfortable to me because I'm a back row Baptist. I'm a man who has an escape route whenever he goes into any building. So, you sit in the back. My family, of course, sat in the balcony because you could really escape the balcony without anybody seeing you. But we did go to church, and my father taught Sunday school, and being Southerners, you were always courteous, and you didn't air your dirty laundry, and you followed all the good Southern rules. Nobody here knows those, right? So, I was a very polite kid, and I was very well regarded in church, and everybody really loved me, and I was baptized twice, and I did all the things that you were supposed to do in church, and then at the ripe old age of 13, I decided I didn't believe in God at all. Science was my new religion, and that was really all I needed. There was no need for God at all because I had science, and that explained everything. And why would you need more than that? So we'll skip a little bit. I won't spend the next 40 years talking about, or the 40 years worth of history that's there. I won't talk to you about this. But as a child, I also grew up with Star Wars. My other church. And so if I was to parallel my own life and the story and my coming to know a deeper divine, God, Father, Mother, God, Spirit, whatever word it is that you choose to use to connect to the thing that's greater than yourself and helps guide you in tough moments, whatever that is for you, there's a metaphor that occurred to me. If you don't know Star Wars, you might know Joseph Campbell. Okay? And if you don't know Joseph Campbell, you might know Carl Jung. And if you don't know Carl Jung, you might know Sigmund Freud. So Carl Jung was a student of Sigmund Freud, decided that Sigmund was too hung up on edible complexes and cigars to keep following him, and decided he would embark on looking at archetypes and the hero's journey. The man who created Star Wars, George Lucas, actually spent a lot of time with Joseph Campbell talking about his film and writing a story, science fiction story, about the hero's journey. So for my life, this scene is particularly appropriate because, Luke has just come out. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, Luke he's in danger here. He's just narrowly escaped a vicious creature. He's lying in the middle of an Arctic tundra that will certainly bring him to death. He doesn't know that he's going to be saved or that he's going to survive this moment. Now his master, who's also been killed, appears to him. It's just like, oh yeah, you're going to go to the Dagobah system, by the way? And as if nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong with this moment right now, which is part of why I read the poem that I read. Love can be fierce to you sometimes. It's good for you, and it's supposed to be what happens, but sometimes it feels like, hey, this is kind of rough. What's going to happen next? And then you get something that appears before you and says, oh, by the way, this is what's next for you. Enjoy, and do it with all your heart. So, at any rate, that's a bit of the hero's journey, and Star Wars has lots of stories have it. So my story is ultimately that I went into mental health. I went into serving others because I thought that was where I would best be suited. I loved psychology in college, and I came out and I started working with at-risk youth. I've got about 20 years in the behavioral health field now in my life, and I've left that field. I left that field. The week after I left that field, I became ordained at this church 1 year ago today. And so it was a rough ride. There were times that were tough. We did a lot of fun things and a lot of good things, but it was very tough. And the last job I had a nice exchange with my then boss, who was a VP who cared mainly about money. And I told him what I thought about that, and he told me that maybe I didn't belong here. I told him he was right. And so, at any rate, at that moment when you're like, all right, here's this big, great junction for me, and I feel like I'm out in the cold and everything else, and Obi-Wan's hanging out in the corner going, yeah, by the way, you're going to go to the Dagobah system. By the way, you're going to go be ordained as a minister. During this process, I also got to participate in a vision quest, and I felt it very important to share this with this group because I think you'll appreciate it. And Vision Quest does lots of things to you, depletes you of certain resources that you're commonly familiar with, like coffee, for example, and has you be in diet, has you meditate a lot. I'm not particularly good at meditating, but forced me to have to do some of these things. And one day, after several days of participating in this process, I had a vision. So I had this dream. It was a bit of a waking dream. I wasn't quite asleep and I wasn't quite awake, but I had this dream and this vision occurred to me, and I was in a place not necessarily unlike a church, with pews and beautiful things up against the wall and all that kind of stuff, and it was bright. Oh my gosh, it was bright. I couldn't see, it was so bright. So at any rate, this blinding light's coming at me, and this person comes up and says, tries to hand me something, and walks to me and says, here you go, this is everything you ever wanted. And I sure. And he's like, oh, okay. You got one more chance, you can have it. And I was like, yes, I'll take it. It's like, no, you're afraid. I'm going to have to take that from you. Walks away. Back behind whatever veiled scene there is. Everybody's like, why is this a good story? So the light dims, and this person, entity, creature, whoever it is, comes out again. It's like, let's chat about that for a minute. Let's process this. It comes back out. It's like, so first of all, you thought that everything you ever wanted was something outside of you that you could be offered. And second of all, you were afraid of it. So he left me with that one for a second, right? And then he starts to walk away, and thought you should consider that. He walks away and he lays down whatever it is on like one of the pews, like it's just something from behind. I assume it was a he, could have been any gender. There was no gender being associated with it. Sets it down and starts to walk away. And looks back and says, so you gonna look at it? And I picked it up, and it was an ordination section. So here I am. After this, no job, no idea what I'm going to do next. I end up meeting a man who's a philanthropist, and an entrepreneur, and has several companies that he invests in. He's got a holdings company. He's got about 18 different projects. He's got some level of investment in and everything else. And I brought him something that I thought maybe was something that I wanted to do, and I shoved a proposal in front of him. He's like, So tell me about you. And we start to talk about this, and I talk about being recently ordained, and I talk about some of my process in my life. He's like, oh my gosh, I think that you need to do this project for me. I'm like, what's the project called? He goes, Signs of God. Now I know I'm thick-headed, and I need it spelled out for me. But that was, I got the point, obviously. So, I opened my arms and I'm like, all right, I'm going with this. Whatever this is, I'm going to go with it. And he's like, I want you to pick up this project. I want you to do it for me. I want you to fulfill it. And we started working together on this thing. And so this guy was a person who drove across the country and started just seeing, churches and steeples and tattoos and everything else. And he's like, look at all this. And he's not a particularly religious person at all. But he keeps seeing all these signs of God. He starts taking pictures, and he takes, on this computer is probably we're up to 6,000 pictures that got compiled in some fashion to help create what this book is. So, at any rate, put a lot of photos in. He brought this in, he created an app, and he created a company. It didn't do anything, and he wanted it to be something. And so the book is what we ended up coming up with. And this, like I say, we're getting cut off at the top here a little bit, but Signs of God was what it was. So this is you can see there's a smattering of pictures around. Now, going back to some of the boyhood story where I decided, I know I left that alone very conveniently, where I decided not to believe in God, or whatever name you choose to associate with the greater divine, with his spirit, if you will. And I decided not to believe in God, and there was a process involved in me kind of reconnecting. And part of that process, when I decided not to believe in God, I did so with a vengeance and was just very hateful of the church that I grew up in, and pretty much all church. And anybody who had a cross or talked about Jesus or needed to talk about God or sang about it, visceral response to people like this. And if you talk to me about it, if you walked up on my porch and you wanted to talk to me about God, you were going to get the quickest versing and broad scoping philosophy that you could possibly get. And my job was to make sure that you wanted to leave my porch. That was my job. I took my personally upon myself. And then, of course, being very intellectual also meant that I had to be very spiritual, because there was no way you could be intellectual and not start paying attention to information that was largely spiritual. And so I started reconnecting to God, and this process, being invited into Signs of God, invited me back to connect to a church that I had cast away. Not to say I had to become a member, not to say anything else, but at the very least, I didn't have to dislike them so much. And that we could bury the hatchet and things could be okay again. And me and Jesus could come together and Jesus could be just all right with me. So yes, and Jesus decided to come pay me a visit in a dream one night. And the funny thing about Jesus is he doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't really have to. It's like, this is good for you. You'll enjoy this. And that was it. Like, really? Okay, that's it? So at any rate, Signs of God Across America, and I had to look for stuff because we didn't have enough photos. We didn't have enough to fulfill this book. There wasn't enough to fulfill the project. So I had to go out and find the rest of the photos to fulfill what this was to become. And so you start off with stuff that's obvious. People like to do memes. God will calm you in the storm, and these are great. This is great stuff. It is. I would say this is largely the difference between the church that I'm in today and maybe the church that's down the street. And you can't read the rest of this. All I need is a little bit of coffee and a whole lot of Jesus, is what the last word is there. And let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. I think that taking a lot of personal responsibility is where sometimes the rub ends up, and where I couldn't find my way to be compassionate, and finally found my way to being compassionate. This project actually helped fulfill that process for me. Going like, God, I wish I could make this do better than that, but some of these won't matter. Surely the Lord is in this place. It's a rock sitting on the side of the church. Mm-hmm. This is a Jesus sign, and it's sitting out in the middle of nowhere along a highway, on a fence, on a tree. And that's just a heart that emerged. I was standing there, and suddenly the water just wrapped around this rock, and a heart was what was there. So these are all pictures. A lot of these were pictures that are ending up in the book or have been represented on the website or somewhere, and people are seeing them. This quote is, "For we walk by faith, not by sight," 2 Corinthians. When we have nothing left but God, we discover that God is enough. Replace God with whatever word you want. If I was at the church down the road, I might not say that part. And then there was that photo. And this was the first photo I took. So if you drive down 240, just after you pass the Patton Avenue exit, you might see this wall. It belongs to a church, a Methodist church in town, called Haywood Street, because that's where it sits. But to me, I think that images speak to us in ways that words have trouble doing. We get hung up on words. Love means something to you, means something else to me. God means something to you, may mean something else. We all running around with different definitions, and that's where communication gets really difficult. And when you get into a person's very sensitive places, like who they feel God is and their spiritual centers, you start using communication. If your communication's not lined up, I think we see in the world now all this conflict because we're not using the same definitions for the same words. Pictures, on the other hand, if you see a picture of a heart and I see a picture of a heart, whether we have different definitions for that, it still means love to us, or it still means something that's not judgmental, at least for most of us. And a picture has a way through words, has a way of communicating that kind of goes beyond these confining concepts that we have a tendency to have around words. So I love this picture because it kind of communicates this out of many one idea, and that love and peace are at its center. And that message is brought to all of us, all the many hands that are there on the wall. Yes?
I just have to say, that's Haywood Street Ministry, which is what serves the homeless of Asheville. And it is that everybody is welcome.
Everybody's welcome.
It is so full of love there. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah, Haywood Street. And they do a welcome table and serve food to people who are homeless or suffering from addiction or suffering from mental illness and have no other place to be. They do it a couple of nights a week, and then after they serve food, they do ministry and everything else. So it's a pretty cool place. Pretty cool place. And they do, for a person, their minister is a friend of mine, the Reverend Brian Combs. And I've never seen somebody be able to speak ministry from the Bible quite the way he does, and still yet it's a completely and totally loving and accepting message. And sometimes I grew up in a Baptist church. There were a lot of messages that weren't necessarily loving and accepting. As you might imagine, there's this kind of exclusivity that can happen in those places. Not to say that that's where they've got to find it out. That's their place. But he does a really good job of finding scripture that really invites everyone to be involved and invites everyone to feel loved and welcomed and accepted. So if you ever get a chance to go see this service, then I would recommend it highly. This is the back side of that wall. And this is the chicken coop across the street. So if you eat eggs in the morning, you're going to be eating some of their eggs. And anybody's welcome. You can walk in there on Saturday morning or Sunday morning and go eat. So I kept going. And that invited me to find things that weren't just churches and crosses and other kinds of things, but things that were, to me they were very interesting. But to me they also communicated community. They communicated love. They communicated acceptance. They communicated a broader message that allowed people to, if you were on one side of one aisle and some other person was on another side of another aisle, and they were standing here looking at these pictures together, that they would share in that moment without having conflict or without meeting. Yes, dear.
Another thing, this is more to everybody else because he's the one who explained this to me. He said that God was like an elephant in a box with a lot of holes, and everyone else is seeing through one hole. So one person is grabbing the elephant's tail, and another is grabbing the trunk, and another is grabbing the ear. And so it's all the same thing, but the ear is nothing like the trunk. And the tail is nothing like the ear. And the foot is nothing like the stomach. And so you get this different.
Everybody argues about the parts that they're having. Yeah. Well done. So how do you communicate with people who are grabbing different parts of the elephant? with a message that everybody can feel welcomed to. You can't use a lot of words for one. So this book has very few words. Very few. A little bit of scripture and even tiny bits of that. Not much. So I had to go search, and searching, actually, if you want to see any of these pictures better, you can always come to the computer at some point in time, and I'm glad to, if you like a picture and you want it sent to you, I'm glad to send it to you. You can have it. The book is for sale, and obviously people make a living and things like that, but as far as pictures are concerned, I think that this stuff belongs to everybody. So if you want a picture so you can put it on your screen, you're welcome to email me about it. But this is a water tower or a water water tank that they use. Well, it's the rain reservoir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the rainwater reservoir. And so it's just been, the whole community's gone and painted on it. And this was a rose, and this is a piece of artwork. It's an angel reaching up, and it says love. So I did not, I could mess with it, but that might take us a while. So this actually sits in Asheville as well. We got a lot of good street art in Asheville. Not everything came from Asheville. You've got these kinds of scenes. People love their crosses, and these are pretty interesting places to put them. So people, we have social media, of course, all lined up for the Signs of God projects, and the Facebook page and Twitter and everything else, and Instagram and that sort of thing. And I have to keep pretty close monitor on the Facebook page because people will throw some stuff in there that maybe is not the most loving and accepting. Now, I did have one woman put a post up after one of the posts I did. It was a picture either of a cross or possibly of Jesus, and everybody was saying how much they really loved it and praised Jesus and all these other things, fairly benign stuff. And then one woman clicked, "This is idolatry." She's not inaccurate. What is this? Well, it's a symbol. And for some, it means so much, and it captures them so deeply that to talk about it in a disparaging way or to sully it in any way or have it compared to anything else, for them, it's nothing short of blasphemy. For me, that's not true. But the line you have to walk is being really, really careful not to cross into a person's very delicate stuff. So that was a fine line I had to walk in this process. Thinking about it and relaying it to myself, what I knew about Christianity, what I knew from my own upbringing, what I knew about our world today and how polarized we can become. I had to set a very deliberate intent to walk that line and not walk one that had, fear, hate, or aggression or conflict in my own heart. So you walk out, and Lucas, will you pull it out for us?
Wait, what?
The camera?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had it. Here we go. I'll take the whole bag. Thank you, sir, very much. So I bought a camera because I kept running around with phones and other people's cameras, and I was like, I gotta have this be housed in one place. And when I put this on, I know what I'm doing. This is my church today. My church is located inside the machinery of this camera, and it's going to, the images that come off of it are going to be ones that honor this in a very concerted way. So you've got crosses, and you've got really interesting ways. Oh, wow. So I'm going to do this because I think that you will see it better. Yes, you will. This is in the Piedmont in North Carolina. We are not alone, this tiny little church on the side. This gentleman, if you walk the streets of Asheville, you probably run into him at some point in time. He is homeless about half the time. He's a super interesting guy and very sweet. But that cross on his neck is made out of can tops. So he took the tabs off of the can tops, and he's cut a piece of it, and he's linked them all together to make that cross. And he could be his own walking ministry, truly. Like when he walks around, he does nothing but, praise you and love you and quote scripture, and like he's just one of those people who feels like his life is always blessed. His life is always blessed. Now, I don't spend all the time. I'm sure he's got bad moments, right? But whenever I meet this man, and I've met him regularly, he is always blessed. He is always blessed by his next meal and by the friend that's helping him get to the store or the person that helped him with the medical appointment that he needed. There's another picture that I have of him getting his hair cut. They have a free haircut clinic. He's getting his hair cut, and he's just as happy as he could be. And this man is always happy. He really is. Like, maybe if I lived my life that way, that wouldn't be bad. You know what I mean? Like, I can think of all the moments with everything that I have that this man does not have. How often I'm not nearly as grateful as he is. So, that wasn't lost on me. And then of course you have people's sadness, their grief. I don't know what happened here. No idea. But it was bad. And this site stays fresh with flowers year round.
Where is that?
Where is it?
Brevard Road. And the funny thing is, you get what you pay attention to, right? You get what you're focused on. And the funny thing is that so many of these things existed in and around Asheville. And I had never seen them. I've lived here for 18 years. I've been coming here since I was 5. So for 40 years, I've been coming to this place and running around these roads and driven many of them a lot. And it wasn't until I had started doing this that I saw any of these. the wall on the backside of Haywood Church. It's the first time I'd ever seen it. I must have driven by that thing 1,000 times. And these places, they are, they still operate. They're still running. They're grabbing hold of just as much as they can grab hold of it. And this was always interesting to me because the amount of faith that it takes to just keep coming to a place that may be run down and has shingles falling off and everything else, but they come there and they worship and celebrate their connection to the divine. What a cool thing that is. And then they try to tell us, of course, how to celebrate our connections to the divine. So these are all the backs of cars. Dear God, thank you for everything. The highway is a very interesting place. Now, I must have 1,000 of these. Pictures of Jesus. Jesus still loves you. God is real. Talk to me. Thousands of these. I mean, we had to be fairly deliberate in what it is that we pick. God is love. So you see all these messages, they come, and you see ones like these. This one was, this is Winston-Salem. Pretty interesting to me. I'm not a person who served in the military. My father was. I recently saw an article about not mixing up celebrating your faith in God and the miracle that Jesus was, and making that equivalent to serving your country in the military. Because there's a tendency to take both those things and make them the same. And they were like, that's not the same. There are lots of people who do all kinds of things, but let's not mix war up with God. And that was their message. They had a point. And yet at the same time, you've got a lot of people who need their faith. And working with a lot of folks who come out of the military, like, their faith is really important to them, as it is to all of us. But it's the thing that when they suffer, and I know that they have suffered greatly, God's what keeps them here. That's what keeps them in a place where they don't suffer as badly. It's a pain reliever for them, for sure. Something that gives them connection that's greater. And it's amazing to witness them speaking their faith. It really is. So you might imagine that taking the pictures, you get to talk to people, right? There are people that come up and, what are you doing? Oh, can I see that picture? Hey, can you take my picture? I'm like, absolutely. And so, this whole message of not equating this, there's a violence element that comes out of religion. We all know it. And then there's another one. We've had a lot of examples of that. So this next picture is it's the morning of the shootings in Charleston. That is in Charleston. I happened to be there that morning for some reason. And we were on a tour, and I got that picture. Wrought with conflict that this picture is. You post this picture on the Facebook page, you got lots of different people who feel lots of different ways about that picture. You can imagine why. So I appreciate the United Methodist Church the United Church of Christ. I appreciate them for their willingness to be brave about this subject. Because God allows you U-turns.
I like that.
Just put in your prayer request. Wait for the guidance to come. You will be given a sign. There's one of the highway signs that's like, well, you did ask for a sign, and it's built there. And, the tendency for people is that when they get their sign, that they want to put their sign on themselves. Or on their church. Or they carry it with them. There's a whole series of photos we have of this man. He walks a long way with that cross. And then we put it in our church. We set it at the top. We put our church outside, which I prefer, if I can manage it. And this is the photo that the woman said was idolatry. Anybody know where that is? It's the Basilica. Yeah, downtown. Mary. Some people have a hard time with having women be celebrated as spiritual figures. Imagine. I had a person after I did, I have the stuff that I do for the Science of God site. I have my own, so Reverend Todd Weatherly, if you want to follow me there, I post stuff there all the time. And a friend of mine was following me, and he was a Christian, and he got together with me for coffee one time. And he saw that I posted that I was totally okay with same-sex marriage, and that people should love one another in the way that they love one another, and love is where that should sit. Something like that. Maybe I said it or somebody else said it better than I did. He came to me and he's just like, I just needed to talk to you about this. Can I tell you? And he sat me down and he wanted to tell me this. He's like, I was ordained by a woman who's partner to another woman, right? And he just kind of stopped. And we still talk, just not as much, Because, people like to bring their images of God. And this is also the below this is the kind of unborn child graveyard or grave, because it's the Catholic Church. So we take what we think God means, and we find the God image, and we put them together. And we say, see, it's all God. Check it out.